When we board a passenger aircraft, we are placing our trust in a complete stranger to fly us safely to our destination. This trust is not based on who they are as individuals, but rather on the systems, structures, and safeguards that support them. Therefore, we are not putting blind faith in one person. We are relying on a complex network of training, regulations, and oversight that has been developed and refined over decades. Commercial pilots undergo years of rigorous preparation. They log hundreds or even thousands of flight hours, participate in extensive testing, and are regularly re-evaluated through simulations and in-flight assessments. This training is enforced by national and international aviation authorities, ensuring that pilots meet strict performance and safety standards. Pilots do not work in isolation. Every flight is supported by a broader system that includes air traffic controllers, maintenance crews, dispatchers, and standardized procedures. These systems are designed with redundancy and error prevention in mind. From detailed checklists to fail-safe autopilot technologies, aviation incorporates safety into every layer of the operation. It's important to remember that since the pilot is also on the plane, their life is just as dependent on the safety of that flight as yours is. However, what happens when the best laid plans and the checklist goes unchecked? This is the tragic story of the Northwest Airlines Flight 255 disaster. On the evening of August 16, 1987, Northwest Airlines Flight 255 was scheduled to fly from Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport in Michigan to John Wayne Airport in Santa Ana, California, with a planned stopover in Phoenix, Arizona. The aircraft assigned to this flight was a McDonnell Douglas MD-82 tail number N312RC, which was manufactured in 1981 and operated by Republic Airlines before being absorbed into Northwest's fleet through a merger. The MD-82 was a twin-engine, narrow-body jet designed for short to medium haul routes and was considered reliable. The crew on board included Captain John R. Mowes, 57, who had over 20,000 hours of flight time, and First Officer David J. Dodds, 35, who had logged nearly 9,000 hours. Alongside them were 4 flight attendants and 149 passengers, including 21 children. Flight 255 departed the gate at 8:32 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and taxied toward runway 3C for takeoff. Weather conditions at the time were marginal but manageable, with some scattered clouds and a light wind. The aircraft had already completed a segment earlier that day from Minneapolis to Detroit, and the turnaround was routine. However, during the pre-takeoff process, a crucial step was omitted. The flight crew failed to configure the aircraft's wing flaps and slats for takeoff. These devices are essential for generating the additional lift required during departure, especially for a fully loaded aircraft. Normally, if the aircraft is not properly configured, the takeoff warning system would sound an alert in the cockpit to warn the pilots. However, in this instance, no such alarm sounded. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, would later determine that the Central Aural Warning System, CAWS, responsible for issuing audible warnings such as the flap/slat configuration alert, had likely been rendered inoperative. The circuit breaker that powered one channel of the CAWS was likely pulled or malfunctioning. There was speculation, though never conclusively proven, that pilots had deactivated the warning system to eliminate nuisance alarms during taxiing, a practice that, while not standard, was not unheard of at the time. Unaware that the aircraft was improperly configured, Captain Mowes and First Officer Dodds initiated takeoff. The MD-82 accelerated down runway 3C at Detroit Metro, lifting off at approximately 8:44 p.m. As the aircraft climbed to just about 50 feet above the ground, it began to exhibit signs of instability. Witnesses on the ground and in the control tower later reported that the plane's nose pitched up steeply before banking to the left. Approximately 2,760 feet down the runway, the left wing of the aircraft struck a light pole near the end of the runway. From there, the situation rapidly deteriorated. The impact caused the wing to rupture, spilling fuel and reducing lift. The aircraft struck the roof of an Avis rental car building and a row of vehicles before crashing onto Middlebelt Road, a major thoroughfare adjacent to the airport. The plane skidded across the road and burst into flames, breaking apart as it did. The wreckage came to rest beneath an overpass, engulfed in fire and smoke. The crash site was a chaotic scene. First responders were on the scene within minutes, but the fire was intense and the wreckage was widespread. The crash had immediate and devastating consequences. All 6 crew members and 148 of the 149 passengers on board were killed. On the ground, 2 people in a car were also killed, bringing the total number of fatalities to 156. Among the dead were entire families, business travellers and tourists, including 21 children. It was at that point the second deadliest aviation accident on US soil and remains the deadliest aviation disaster in Michigan's history. Remarkably, one passenger survived the crash, a 4-year-old girl named Cecilia Sitchin. Rescuers found her still strapped into her seat, which had been ejected from the aircraft and landed in a patch of debris away from the fire. She sustained serious burns and multiple broken bones, but was the only person among the 155 on board to survive. Her survival became a powerful symbol of hope in the midst of overwhelming tragedy. Cecilia was raised by relatives and remained out of the public eye for much of her life, choosing privacy over publicity in the wake of the crash. The investigation into the crash was led by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and focused on multiple factors, including aircraft systems, pilot behaviour, airport operations, and the maintenance record of the aircraft. The NTSB released its final report on May 10, 1988. The board concluded that the probable cause of the accident was the flight crew's failure to use the taxi checklist, which resulted in the omission of the extension of the flaps and slats prior to takeoff. Compounding this error was the failure of the takeoff warning system to alert the crew to the improper configuration. Without flaps and slats, the aircraft was unable to generate sufficient lift, leading to an aerodynamic stall and crash. The NTSB's findings sparked widespread discussion within the aviation industry. One of the most controversial aspects was the failure of the takeoff warning system. In their report, investigators suggested that the circuit breaker that powered one channel of the warning system may have been intentionally pulled by the crew, although they could not confirm this with certainty. Some experts argued that poor cockpit design and systemic issues within the airline's culture may have contributed to the error. The crash of Flight 255 served as a sobering reminder of the importance of procedural discipline and the dangers of routine complacency, even among experienced pilots. As a result of the crash, changes were made to pilot training, checklist usage and aircraft design. Airlines placed renewed emphasis on checklist discipline and cockpit resource management. The incident also led to improvements in the reliability and redundancy of onboard warning systems. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and aircraft manufacturers collaborated on ways to ensure that no single point of failure could disable a critical warning system. Additionally, airlines instituted stricter policies regarding the manipulation of circuit breakers during normal operations. The emotional toll of the crash was immense. Vigils were held across Michigan and in other parts of the country. In the days following the accident, mourners left flowers, photos and messages at the crash site and at Detroit Metro Airport. The airline offered support to victims' families and established a fund to help with funeral expenses. In the months that followed, a memorial was erected near the crash site in Romulus, Michigan, at the corner of Middlebelt Road and I-94. The memorial consists of a black granite monument engraved with the names of all 156 victims, including the 2 people killed on the ground. Each year, families and community members gather there to remember those lost in the disaster. For years afterward, the crash of Flight 255 remained a defining moment for Northwest Airlines. The airline eventually retired the flight number 255 out of respect for the victims, and it has not been used since, even after Northwest's merger with Delta Airlines in 2008. While the airline is no longer in existence, the legacy of Flight 255 endures, both as a cautionary tale and as a catalyst for safety improvements. The story of Cecilia Keechan continued to capture public attention long after the crash. For most of her life, she avoided the media and rarely spoke about her experience. In 2013, she appeared in a documentary titled Sole Survivor, which focused on people who had been the lone survivors of major airline disasters. In the film, she shared glimpses of her journey, speaking with quiet dignity about the burden of survival and the impact the crash had on her life. Though she survived physically, the emotional scars of losing her parents and brother remained deep. The tragedy of Northwest Flight 255 is remembered not just for its devastating human toll, but for the way it reshaped aviation safety and public consciousness. It highlighted the necessity of strict procedural compliance and underscored how even seasoned flight crews could fall victim to lapses in routine. It also emphasized the importance of backup systems that must function independently of human oversight. Aviation experts point to the crash as a key moment in the evolution of Crew Resource Management (CRM), a training framework that emphasizes communication, coordination, and decision-making in the cockpit. Even decades later, the lessons from Flight 255 are taught in aviation safety courses around the world. Pilots, mechanics, and air traffic controllers study the incident not to place blame, but to better understand how complex systems can fail and how such failures can be prevented. For the families of the victims, the pain has not disappeared, but many have found solace in honouring the memory of their loved ones and advocating for safer skies. In the final analysis, the crash of Northwest Airlines Flight 255 was a convergence of human error and mechanical vulnerability. It was a tragedy born from a lapse in procedure and a silent warning system, but it was also a turning point that galvanized changes in aviation culture. The loss of 156 lives, the survival of one child, and the enduring impact of that August night in 1987 serve as both a memorial and a mandate. Never forget and never grow complacent. But sadly, despite all the measures implemented after the crash, human error remains the most significant factor in the majority of plane crashes, contributing to 70% to 80% of aviation accidents. Our thoughts go out to all those affected by the Northwest Airlines Flight 255 tragedy.